All right, so today we're gonna show you how to set up a central location for all your classes and all your packages. When you start using third-party classes and packages like Tweenlight and Adobe classes and other ones that you might find out there that you may want to use, maybe Papervision for 3D and all that kind of stuff, you want to keep everything in one central location. You want to keep all your classes, all your custom classes that you create also in a central location. Therefore, when you want to use them in any project, Flash knows where to get those. So the way we do that is, what I want you guys to do is, right now I have in my documents, I believe the Mac has a documents folder. If you look in there, I go to documents and I have a thing called AS classes. I'm in there, then I have dev, which is like a framework like for the agency, and then third party, which are third party packages. And then I have an AS2 and an AS3 folder. And this is, I used to use SVN to check in and check out files. SVN is like a versioning system. So this is why you see all these tags and branches, but you don't need to do this. You can simply go create a third party folder, AS2, AS3. Then you can, and at this point, you can have a source folder, and then here you'll have all your third party packages. If you look here, you see you have a COM folder. Inside the COM folder, there's other packages that I use. One of them, as you can see, is the GreenSock package, which is the Tweenlight package. Big Spaceship and other ones, Facebook stuff that I use and all that kind of stuff, all sitting in the COM folder. In the net folder, which is my stuff, I have one from a package called High Res, and then I have all my other ones in Julio Vargas. I got all my packages in here. If you go into utilities, you see these are all the classes and stuff that I've created that I use on a regular basis for other projects. These are reusable classes, and we'll learn how to do that. The way this is set up is, if you look here, it says net, and then it says Julio Vargas. My URL for my domain is juliovargas.net. So when you guys create your packages, you're going to create it the same way. If I go to com, you're going to see it says Adobe. Why? Because it's adobe.com, so it's they kind of reverse it. All right, that's the way it goes. Same thing again. Here's com, GreenSock, right? So you go to greensock.com, and that's how you would set this up. So when we get started, when you guys go into your documents folder and create this structure for yourself. All right. The way you actually link this to your actual Flash application is, you don't link it to the application specifically. You link it to the program itself. You're going to go to Edit, Preferences. I believe in the Mac is like, Flash and then Preferences. You're going to go to where it says ActionScript. We go to ActionScript 3.0 Settings, and then here you see it says Source Path. I'm going to create a little folder, and then you're going to navigate to wherever it is at that moment. In my case, it's in Documents, My Documents, AS Classes, Third Party, AS3, Trunk, Source. All right, and I leave it at source because then that's where all the other ones are. Hit OK. As you can see, it puts it in the path. Now I'm going to hit OK. I'm hit OK. Now Eli had a question regarding this. When he tried to run this actual little application at home, it was telling him that he was missing the GreenSock classes, and he was saying, "Where are they? I don't find them." That's because I already had this set up for it to work. I already had my linkages already set up, so that's the reason why I couldn't get it to work. That's the way Flash. So Flash now knows if you go into the excuse me. So Flash knows that now when we're using this stuff here, when you're setting up your project, and here's your main class for the actual document, and you're saying import com.greenstock.tweenlight, import net.julio Vargas, loading and all that stuff, it knows where to get it. If you don't link it the way I showed you with the folder structure and all that, it's going to tell you, hey, I can't find these. They're missing.
But that's all separate from like the current project that you're working on, right?
This is completely separate. This is the global class path. And this is so that you can, these are reusable classes. This is packages.
You have to always define the path every time you
No, because you set it in your preferences. So it's a preference for the actual application, not the actual project. Where you might want to create stuff that is local to the project or to the project specifically, that's when you might want to go, here's my source inside my project. And then you'll have stuff like in here that I might have created just specifically for the project. The way you do that is you will go into File. Instead of Preferences, you're going to go into your Publish settings, right? You're going to go into Flash and do the same thing. ActionScript 3.0 settings, and then in here you're going to hit the little folder and navigate to your project. In this case, I have it on my desktop called Training, Start, Project, Source, and then I leave it there because I wanted to grab anything from any of those packages. All right, that's the way you're going to set those up. Any questions? Make sure that this runs. Alright, and there it is. That's the same thing we were working on the other day. Alright, so where we left off with loading external XML, loading external images. And we got kind of a little bit lost with that. So we're going to take it step by step. The first thing I did was created my document class, right? And I attach it to the actual application, right? So if we open up my document class, which I already have open here, right? One of the first things that I did was import everything that I needed to use. So I knew that I was going to use the GreenSock package. I knew I was going to use stuff from my own personal packages. One class that's called the XML data, and another one called the basic image loader, which simply does that, load images. And then I have something that you see here that says com.yr.ui.nav buttons. In there, what I do is if I go into here, we go to YR UI, and this is specific to this project.
Right.
I'm going to open that nav button, and as you can see here, I have, it's a very tiny class. All this is doing is what we've been doing in the previous weeks, is bringing in the buttons, right, from the library. That's all it is. New next button, new previous button. That's it. What we haven't done here is return values without functions. So as you can see here, I have a public function that's called getNextButton, and it's supposed to return a movie clip. As you can see here, it says return next button. How does it know what to return? Because we told it what next button is. Anybody lost there? Same thing for the previous button. So what happens is when I call this public function from another class, it's supposed to return an instance of next button. Got it? Same thing with the previous button. What this allows me to do is, if at any point in time I want to bring more of these in, I don't have to reinstantiate and pull these out all over again. I don't have to do new next button, new previous button every time. All I say is get next button, and it's going to come and give me another one.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? Because I'm telling it that it should return a movie clip, right? And then you use the keyword return, and then whatever movie clip that is in that instance. In my library, I have these two here, right? Anybody not understand this part? This is very important to understand.
So when you tell it to get next button, you're going to tell it in the main class. You would tell it to get next.
That's
button.
correct. So if I go to
all you have to do is just
right. So instead of instantiating, going through all of that,
exactly,
this is what we call object-oriented programming. And now what we're doing is we're doing encapsulation. So we're encapsulating all the actual features and instances of all your objects and classes separately. If you ever wanted to change your next button or anything like that, make a graphical change or anything, you don't ever have to touch the code. You go into your document, you change it, and everything's going to work. So we're going to skip through the loading of the data. I'm going to show you where I do that. So what I did was I have here, I imported it up here, right? I have a variable, a private variable, right? I data typed it to the nav buttons, that class. And then down here, I instantiated and I added to the display list. The reason why I added to the display list is because those are returning display objects, actual objects that are going to be sitting on the stage. Then I do setup nav. Instead of nav, I say, okay, from that class, get the previous button. That's it. And then I position it, I tell it what to do, I set the alpha and all that stuff, and I add that one that was returned to the display list. Anybody not get that? No?
No, I got it.
You got it? Okay, cool. So that's simply, so anytime I want to get another one, I just say nav that get previous button, and it's going to return me that object. And the same thing I did here. Next thing I did, I says, okay, then I added the listeners to them, their button mode, again for both of them.
What I'm not getting is what, like, why is this better than just doing it straight here?
Okay, so because what I'm showing you, again, when I'm doing all these lessons, I'm showing you the techniques, right? So say you're creating a giant website, right? Maybe you're working your website and you have previous and next buttons, and you have close buttons, and you have many buttons that you're going to be using throughout the site. In this case, you would have to then go, you have to instantiate them every single time, right? You have to say public var next button, and then new whatever button it is, and then put the X and Y properties and do all that stuff all over again. Every single time you're going to do that. In this case, you don't have to do that. In this case, you say, give me that button, and all that is already done for you.
But you're doing the X and Y over here also.
Yes, I wanted to show you that you can still control the properties on this end. You can, again, this is a simple example, but you can do that all in here. And if you know that your buttons are going to be in a specific position at all times, or your X buttons are always going to be in the top right, you know, your left button is always, your previous button is always going to be on the left hand of the stage, you know, and then the next button on the right hand of the stage, you set this up here, you know. Now let's say you're creating another photo gallery, right? You don't have to do none of that no more. You just say nav that get button and everything is set up. You know, not only that, if you're reusing these buttons over and over and over in your application, then you don't have to instantiate it. Remember, every time you say new whatever object it is, you're putting this into memory. You know, so you're increasing memory every single time. So Flash has to take that object, store it in memory, and keep track of it. In this case, it doesn't. It already has an instance of that one. We don't have to create a new one every single time.
So the get is just you're going to get that one that already stored.
That's already ready, yeah. All right.
Would if those buttons, can you go back to the button?
To the
if
nav.
those buttons were because I can see why you make these public functions, because you're gonna send them to you're gonna pick them up from main, right?
That's correct.
But on the variables at top, it doesn't matter if they're private or public, correct? Or no?
No, you're right. You're right.
Oh.
It doesn't matter.
I just didn't know if you had to
These
public.
actually can be private.
Because it's to that
Because it's to this
function
one, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
or class, I mean. Right?
These can be private.
Okay.
Which
No, I
they
just wanted
should.
to
No,
know.
you're right. They should have been private. I'm not sure why I put them as public, but they should have been private. Anybody now? So everybody gets it what I did there, right?
Yeah.
So this is what we're doing here is we have a method that's returning a value. In this case, it's returning a movie clip. It could return a string. It could return. You can have a whole calculation there that does, whatever, does some sort of calculation and returns back a result. And all you do is call it, and it's going to return that result. All right, we got that. Hmm.
Alright, I got it.
It's okay.
Sure.
Take a picture. Mental picture.
I had to think about something. I was like, okay.
Right.
I'll still process the information.
All right. All right. So, continuing, we have our main class. Everybody's already familiar with all this stuff here. The first thing that I'm doing after that is I'm making sure that my data is loaded. Before you start any of your project, you gotta make sure they have all your data so that you can use it. Now, the reason why I do that is because you might have your XML that might control your X and Y properties, positionings, alphas, transition types, all kinds of things. And if you're gonna use it in your application, you wanna make sure that that data is available. So that I always upload the data straight off the bat. All right. Now, here's my function. It's called load data. What I'm doing is I'm creating a new instance or instantiating the XML data class, and is expecting an argument of a string. In this case, the path to the XML, right? You see, I brought it in here. I have a variable. I'm instantiating it. And then I'm adding a listener. This listener is from the XML data class, and it has a constant of data loaded. Anybody remember what a constant is? A constant is a variable that never changes, right? It's a specific value that never changes. That's what that is. All right, then it's expecting to run this particular method once it's finished. If I go into this XML data class, then you see here that I have a public variable called data, right, and is of type XML. Then I have two constants, right, and again, constants is just variables that never change. They're always the same, right? And I have one that's called data loaded, and I have one that's called data error. These are all public. Then I have my private variables, file, which is a string, and data loader, which is a URL loader. We're going to be using the URL loader class because we're going to be sending it a URL. All right? Anybody lost? Not understanding? All right, cool. So the next thing I did in my constructor, I said, okay, expect something, accept some sort of a source of type string. All right? And then once you receive it, store it into this variable that I've created here. The reason why I did that is because this variable is global to this class, and I want to be able to use that. So all I did was pass it to this variable. I stored it. That value is now stored in that variable. So this is my constructor. If you look at main, the constructor is passing that specific argument that it's expecting, and is a string. XML data is expecting a string, right? I store it inside that variable. Then I say, okay, load the data. I can call this immediately because I've already stored this. So in my load XML data function, I create a new URL loader, which we've already told it here that we're going to be using. Then I say load a new URL request. Right, so load a URL. This is the request, and we have the file that we've stored here that we've passed to the constructor.
That's a lot of passing.
Mm-hmm. But what this does is this makes this class reusable, right? This is not there's nothing specific, excuse me, about this class, right? There's nothing that says this has to work for this particular project. You can continue and using this class in another project. If you want to load more XML, you just call this class, you pass it a file path to where the XML is, and it works. This is a reusable class. Okay, cool. So it loads it. Here's the request. Then I have two event listeners here. One, it's listening for a complete event. Another one for input-output error event. So if the data is loaded, it's going to call the data loaded function. If there's an error with either the file path that couldn't load it or any type of input-output error, it's going to go and run that function. So what I do is, in this case, once it's complete, it runs this function here, the data loaded function. I remove the listener, right? Because we always want to clean up after ourselves. I store the data that's come in. I have the object, and I have the data. The data is a built-in keyword. So whenever you have an object that's coming in, you can always get its data by saying whatever object dot data. In this case, the object is data loader, and then it's data.
What would happen if you wouldn't remove the event listener? Nothing. It's just extra space, kind of.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
memory that it keeps track of. But you can run into problems where if you don't remove the event listener, Flash might continue to start dispatching this event, and it'll continue to start running functions over and over and over. But not only that, but you also want to do a cleanup in memory and all that kind of stuff. So this data variable that I created up here, you see, is expecting an XML, right? That's the type of data that it's expecting. It's a public variable data. So I'm storing whatever's coming into this object inside data. So it's storing all that XML inside that data variable. Everybody good? At that point, it's dispatching the event of data loaded. That's my variable here, my constant. All right. So when this fires off, it's going to come up here, remove the listener, store the data, and dispatch an event saying, hey, the data is loaded. Now at this point, we're not doing anything with this in this class. It's just doing things. It's just loading it in, storing the data, dispatching the event, whatever. In my main, as you can see, where I instantiated it, I have XML, right? Add event listener from that class, data loaded, right? Because the entire Flash environment works on events, right? Dispatching events, listening for events, and when that event dispatches, then you do something. So it's listening for that data loaded dispatch, which I have here, is dispatching it right here. So in the main class, I'm listening for that, and then I tell it to run that function. This is why I was saying you need to understand exactly what you guys do with your functions and what they do and what they are. Because you've been doing this, you know, this whole week, so you just haven't really put it all together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So this is why. So I'm not gonna go past this part. We're gonna walk through this again. Where do you want me to start?
Where do you want them to start?
Because I know that's a few like, what the hell? I'm
Shut on
lost.
Flash and turn it back on.
I mean, my problem is that like when you're going through it, I get it.
Mhm.
Like I understand it. I'm thinking like my concern is I'm thinking about it like, okay, how the fuck am I gonna do this by myself? You know?
Well, the way you want to do is, and we haven't gotten into structuring your project, which means that you literally have, you know, 2 or 3 sheets of paper, whatever it is, and you're gonna draw like little boxes, and you're gonna say, I'm gonna need, you know, a button class, I'm gonna need, you know, a class to load my XML. You're gonna actually lay out your entire project, so you try to, as much as possible, get everything that you're gonna need to load your project, and say, okay, this is what I need, this is what I need, this is what I need, and then you start. So you could think of it of a procedural manner where you say, the first thing I want to do is, okay, I have to create a Flash file, obviously an FLA. You know, I want to make sure that in my FLA, the only thing that I want to have in my library is my next button and my previous button and the fonts that I'm going to use. That's all that I care about my FLA, right? That's what I want. I want to have that in my FLA. Okay, cool. You set all that up. You set up your stage. Now you start with your main class, right? Everything starts with your main class. You create your stub code. You say, well, I'm going to be using Tween Light. I'm going to need to load data. I'm going to need to load basic image loader. And you don't have to do it in this specific order. You could do it as you're going to use it. As long as you have it laid out and you've thought about it and you have it planned out, then you start putting it in as you're going to use it. So the first thing that I did, it was I imported everything that I needed to use from the built-in packages. I knew I was going to use this, and I knew I was going to use this. I didn't import this or this yet at that moment in time. I said, let me make sure that I'm getting my data first. That's the most important thing. So I went ahead and I created what I needed to create, my variable. I loaded the data, I instantiated it, passed it what I needed to pass, waited for the listener. And then at this point, you know, I wanted to make sure that I got my data.
Okay.
That's what I did. Then once I got all my data, I says, okay, I got what I need. Now I need to load, now I have to take that data and use it, so I need to load my images. So I said, okay, let me import my basic image loader, you know. Then I did that, and I wait, and I loaded one image. I'll say, okay, if it loads the first image, it's gonna load all my other images, no problem. Now let me put in my navigation buttons. Now I had already set up this nav, that UI.nav before I set up my XML data because I knew that I was going to use that. So at that point I says, okay, now let me set up my previous and next button, because I'm going to be using that next. The next thing that I'm going to do after that is I want to cycle through the actual images. So I'm going to need some sort of UI. So I set up my buttons right here. Then I added the listeners. I says, okay, now I'm going to need for them to go to the next page and the previous page. All right, and this we already know, if count total images, and I've already stored total images up here. When I load my data, right? You see this XML loaded function. I store the path and I store the total amount of images. Now remember when we spoke about children.length?
Yeah.
And remember we spoke about the attributes, what they were? So if we were to open up this XML file, I'll open this. Alright, let me open it with that. As soon as this opens, or did it open already? Almost.
Whoa, why did they have a black box?
I don't know. This is a very cheap laptop. I just bought it for this purpose.
Oh, for real?
Yeah.
Just for this?
Yeah.
You're expensive?
$400. All right. So here it is. So it's grabbing from the XML the attribute image path, and it has a location to where it should be all the images. All right. So that is this part right here. So it's images, attribute image path. Images, attribute image path. Now the reason why I put it in the parent node is because I don't want to type in /images/ every single time for every one of these. I just want to have the path, have it available, and then just append the actual image. All right, and here's another attribute that's called source inside the images image path.
Do you call Swift files also, or can only be?
Yep, we're gonna get into that. Yeah, you're gonna load Swift files pretty much the same way you load your images, the same exact way, except you're loading a Swift, but you're gonna do it the same identical way.
Because I'm thinking of HTML, that's like really close to what I remember.
The syntax, yes, the way you write XML is using HTML type syntax with the brackets and all that stuff the same way.
What's the benefits of doing it this way and the way I did it inside of Flash? The URL request and then for that folder.
Well, now if you wanted to use that for something else, or you want to do a specific project and that changed a little bit, now what? You can't because it's stuck to that project.
You got you, man.
So this is why you create classes that are reusable. When you start creating, your packages and your custom classes, if you're doing something over and over repetitively, that's an indication that I should create a class for this because I'm doing this over and over and over. Even let's say this little gallery thing, we can make this entire thing reusable. It's almost there with some minor adjustments. And then every time you want to create something, then you just create a main class, and then just out of that other class that you've created that uses all these other classes, you just tell it, here's an array of images. These are the buttons that I want you to use, and that's it. And it's done in like literally 10 minutes.
I think that's what's getting me confused. Like I understand the concepts of what we've been doing, but like when I saw the one that Samir did, I was like, this is simple compared to this.
Mm-hmm.
And like I'm always drawn more towards the simpler, easier, faster things to do.
Yeah.
So then I see all these steps, and you gotta do this to load this, and it's like in his it was like load images or in this folder, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like,
But it isn't reusable.
no, I understand that part.
Yeah.
But my brain explodes when I
It's just that right now it feels like a lot of back and forth. So it's like you constantly have to be like, oh shit, like and you kind of
Right, but literally it took me it literally took me, I want to say, no more than 20 minutes to set up this entire gallery, and I can do this again in probably less time because I already have everything
Yeah,
set.
everything's set up.
Everything's already saved. Everything's already
But
set.
the thing is that for you, it's like second nature. For
No, no, I understand that, but what I'm saying, I'm showing you the techniques because it's more efficient to do it. It's a lot of work up front, and I understand that when you guys start creating your stuff. It's a lot of work up front, but later down the road, you're gonna love it because hopefully we want to get to a point where we want to be building bigger and better projects, and you don't want to be rewriting something to load an XML. You don't want to be rewriting something to load an image because every time you do that, then you will have to, rewrite this entire code over and over again. You would have to go and write another way to load your images for every single project. I don't want to do that. I want to have stuff that I can just send it what I want to do, have it do all the work in the back, and then just give me what I need. You don't want to be doing that. Yeah, it works in these instances because we're doing very, simple project. We're just loading little things. That's fine. What I want you to take from this is the actual techniques and the concepts behind it. The concepts behind object-oriented programming. If you look at the XML data class, that's still an object. Remember when we first started, everything's an object. So I can control that any way I want. And the same thing with the nav buttons. You just got. I trust me. I understand where you're coming from because this is too long. This is it was either easier in AS2 and it's much more complicated in AS3. You know what I mean? Or it's like, why do I have to do this if I can just put everything in one file? Now that's another thing. Right now this is small, but when you have a microsite to do, you're gonna write thousands of lines of code, and you don't want to have one big giant ActionScript file. You are, especially when you're trying to debug and look for stuff. It doesn't make sense. This way, when you separate things like this and you encapsulate everything, you can troubleshoot way faster. You can say, well, this button is acting weird. Then you just go to the button class, or the data's not loading. I don't understand what's going on. You go and check, make sure that your XML data class. Now, you wouldn't need to do that because this class you've used 10 times on 10 different projects and it always works. So you immediately can eliminate that. Okay, I know that works. I don't even need to touch that. Then it's got to be something in my main class. You will eliminate yourself hours of debugging and digging and going through your packages to figure out what the hell is going on. It makes more sense in bigger projects. I do agree that in smaller projects you might be able to scale it down, but I would still build it this way because I can use it at any point in time. Like right now, the way this is set up, with a couple of more changes, I can just put this online and anybody can create, a slideshow with very minimal effort, And if I get the time to do it, I'll do it so you guys can understand a little bit better, But this is all doing the heavy lifting. This is also going to allow your application to run faster. It's going to be also more memory efficient as well to do that. So, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. I get the reason.
Yeah.
So if we go step by step, like if you had to summarize, this loads, then like if you go to, for example, the data loader class or any of those classes, like the different steps within that class. Do you think we have to know the specifics of each thing that happens in there, like event listeners and the? You
do. It's really nothing
So
different.
I copy and paste that shit.
There's nothing different than what you've been doing. What we're doing is just building upon what you've learned, right? So we were using the movie clip class before over and over and over and over and over, right?
Right, but for example, right, you got the data loaded. That it's gonna listen for that, then it knows it's loaded, and then it's gonna load the images, basically, right? What is the data error for example? I don't get like why.
Because
different steps in there.
Yeah. So what happens here is I'm dispatching in the data error. I'm dispatching another event, right? And I didn't do it here, right? But I would have put another event listener here, right? And I would have done. What did I call it? Data error, right? So what I would have done is, for my purposes, for when I'm writing, So now I will create this function, right? So let's say private, all right, and then it's an event. I'll show you exactly why.
It's just an E, no?
I use EVT normally. Sometimes when the application writes it for me, I leave it alone. But it could be E, it could be whatever. Remember that. All right. So here I would, for instance, let's just say trace. You know. Right. So I will put this as a check to find out if my XML is not loaded, because it's going to dispatch this data error event if there's a problem with it loading the XML. So I will listen for that, and then I would do some sort of something here. In this case, I would do a trace. So when I run my application, right, let's say I say images here. So it says, you say, oh, it's not working, and you say error cannot load XML. Now I know there was a problem with that particular thing. I could do one or two things and say, okay, let me go fix it, see what it is, and I'll go trace my steps, make sure that I don't have a misspelling, or there's a XML file that's malformed or something. Or I can have the application do something else if it couldn't load the XML. Maybe you have a local copy of that XML, or maybe you have something else that would happen if it can't load the images. Maybe it's, you know, sends the user a nice message. I'm sorry, please come back later.
Right.
We seem to have it, whatever, blah blah blah. That's where I would use something like that, you know. And normally I do that. I didn't do it in this case, but this case I'm like, okay, I know that there's a problem. I couldn't load my XML. Or you could send them to like 404 error page, whatever. You could redirect them somewhere else where you know this is working or whatever, different type of things.
My site didn't load. Why don't you go to David's site?
Yeah. You could do that, you know. So
Mine won't load. I'm like, what is he?
Just keep returning.
He's
Eventually
stuck
I'll get to
he's
Julio's
stuck
and then
on,
it'll work.
XML version 1. This will take the frame.
I've seen some really creative.
all right, any other questions, like as to why we would do something else, or what would you like to go over? Everything.
it's tough
Where do we start?
because right now I'm thinking in my head just like, yo, like right now I'm a little lost, but like repetition, you know, like eventually I guess, you know,
I think what
so I don't really know
throws me
exactly where to
off
start.
is all the names. Like seeing data loaded, data loader, XML loader, XML data, data XML something else. That's like, I'm like, I don't even know what's doing what anymore. You know what I mean? Like that's what throws me off. Like I know what it's doing, but I don't know what's going into what and what's storing into here, because it's like all the names are like, there's so many.
Another thing is,
You know
let's
what I'm
say
saying?
another
Yeah, like-
another advantage to this is, rather than having it like say excuse me, inside like all your code inside your FLA, obviously, is say David or Zamir wants to use this thing, right? Then you send them the code base. You say, here you go. And Zamir's gonna look at it and says, okay, so all I need to do is pass it an XML with my images, and that's it. And that's what we'll do. He'll create an XML, put in his own images, and he's done, and the whole application works. And we work in a collaborative environment, right? Then I can say, hey David, can you create the XML for me? You know what I mean?
I'll pass it on, Franklin.
Or
I'll be like, oh yeah.
you create Franco, you create the XML, you know what I mean? And you'll understand when you start working in a collaborative environment where all this makes much more sense. Especially if I'm building the main frame of the application. So I'll build in like all the connections and all the UI while you're working on the images section, you're working on the portfolio section, you're working on the contact section. You know, you all can be working individually, and at the end of the day, it all comes together and it just works, right? Because then all I'm doing is I'm just loading your Swift files, and you develop it individually in different parts. This also helps with if we have like revisions. So let's say for the November, you're doing the pre-Christmas site, and then after November, it's the same site, but it has more content. It would be very, very easy to update and change and add new things, add to the menu as we've seen before. So what I'm gonna do on Monday is I'm gonna break down the XML data class even more. I'm gonna attach just that by itself to a main class, so you can see how each class function. Even though we went through it today, I can see that you guys are not understanding too well. Even though this is just, we're using the URL loader class, just like we've been using the movie clip class, just like we've been using from the string class. You just, the thing here is just to know what you have to use, and you're not gonna know unless somebody teaches you or you go online and look for it. You know, you're just not gonna know.
I think maybe that's what it is. Just like maybe like the new classes and the new names that we haven't seen before. Maybe it's just kind
Exactly.
of
Yeah, and it could be very intimidating
because
because
it's a lot.
like,
And it's a lot of it too. It's not just like a little paragraph of stuff. It's like a lot at once. I think that's probably what it is.
and maybe you guys made me too proud because you guys were were doing so well and you were banging everything out. I was like, okay, then I can do this for them and they'll get it.
Well, because like if we go through each function, I mean, I think everybody here really kind of understands what's going on in each thing. But yeah, it's a little overwhelming at first. I think just to look at everything and then jumping through all the classes and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it when you're explaining it. I get it, you know. But it's like, if I'm not messing with this, like if I'm not being proactive about messing with it or whatever,
Yeah,
it's frustrating, dude,
that's
because-
one thing you guys have to understand. If you're not practicing this, like at least twice a week, I want to say, if you're not like living in this at least twice a week, unfortunately on your own off time or whatever,
Yeah, it's like,
you're not gonna get it. You're gonna get lost. You're not gonna remember anything. You're gonna always be referring back, and you're gonna get frustrated. You get very frustrated. Fuck, why
how
I can't
I
get
feel
this
right
done?
now.
You know,
Yeah.
you gotta go back to your notes, but you really want to learn it, but you haven't spent. If I stay away from ActionScript for even 2 weeks without touching it for 2 weeks, I sometimes gotta go back and just refresh myself for a couple of minutes. Like, oh, okay, sometimes I forget, or sometimes I haven't used something for a long time, and I go back. I still gotta go online or go to my notes and be like, how the hell did I do that shit? And I gotta go and look through everything. You have to be on this consistently in order for you to actually get it and understand it, because it can get very complicated. You know, and this is not complicated at all. You know. So when we get into the bigger projects, when we do
Thanks for not streaming it.
when we do our slideshow that's gonna run video and Swift and images and all that kind of stuff, you know, you're gonna get into big classes and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, you have to practice it. You know, even if you're just sitting at home, like I do stuff when I'm sitting and watching television. You know, yeah, it might take me 4 hours of watching television before I do maybe 100 lines of code. But I'm still messing with it, I'm kind of just playing with it and messing with it, testing around. You guys are all on Facebook. Subscribe to like the Adobe Flash channel. They have excellent tutorials there all the time. They have new things that are happening all the time. Go look for the feeds. Go look at tutorial sites. Do simple stuff. Just mess with it. Even if it's not a photo gallery, if it's something that shows you how to like do a mouse tracer, or just so you can start getting used to how everything is working. You have to literally, live and breathe this stuff for you to actually get around it. Doing it, taking this long break was not really good
that
for
break
us.
sucked, man.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's like, yeah, like,
It
just sucked, bro.
Yeah.
Like, it sucked, man. It sucked.
There's a site called Go To and Learn. That guy's pretty good too.
Yeah, but
He does a bunch of different stuff.
he's really good, but you have to already know.
Yeah.
Which is why I wouldn't recommend that site. You have to already know.
Thanks, Eli.
Well, no,
No, because he is good.
I know. I learned Tweetline.